later on, that person was exonerated through, let's say, DNA evidence. So we know there are groups, projects like the Innocence Project and others. There are national groups and state by state groups. There's a Georgia Innocence Project that advocates for those that have been falsely incarcerated, and they fight for their freedom. Much of it is based on DNA evidence. So when you have DNA evidence, so now you can turn around and say the DNA points to someone else and not to this person. And by the way, typically, in order to gain freedom for the person that's been put away behind bars, that's been convicted and sentenced and is now incarcerated, typically, in order to even see that case, the courts will require that the petition to the court comes with clear evidence, like, for example, DNA evidence that implicates someone else, or clearly exonerates the person that has been convicted of the crime. But we know this, that there are many people, many people that have been convicted and that have been incarcerated in prison based on the testimony of eyewitnesses that we know based on science was not them, based on DNA evidence, and yet there were eyewitnesses that said that it was this person. So how do you reconcile it? How do you reconcile the eyewitness versus the DNA? The answer is that the eyewitness testimony is not infallible. It's not foolproof. In fact, on the contrary, it's very not reliable. Which is why, parenthetically, in Jewish law, a matter is only established by way of the testimony of two witnesses that have been examined intensely by the judges to make sure their story checks out. And if there's any doubt as to the story of either one of the witnesses, or if the stories don't match up, that testimony is thrown out of the court. And by the way, you should know, parenthetically, many of you do know this already, because we've talked about this in other classes, the Jewish system of law, and when I say Jewish system, what I mean is Torah law. I don't mean Israeli courts. I mean Jewish law, Torah law. In Jewish law, the judges, the system is not an adversarial judicial system where two sides are pitted against each other and the real aim is to poke holes in the other side's story. So, for example, the United States is an adversarial judicial system where you have the prosecution and the defense, and each one is kind of telling its story and trying to knock the other one's story. So they're kind of pitted against each other, with the jury kind of like this third party watching this theater and deciding which story makes more sense or who made the better argument. That's our system. In Torah, it's not an adversarial judicial system, but it's an inquisitorial system where the judges are directly examining the witnesses. In our system, lawyers and attorneys are examining the witnesses to further their narrative, which opposes the other's narrative. In a Jewish system, in a Torah system of law, it's not, you could have representation, but it's not about the lawyers telling a story. It's about the judges themselves directly examining the facts of the case and the witnesses of the case. So it's a different system. But know this, that when you have two witnesses that come to court in Jewish law, and they both have a story, they have what they are going to testify about. Let's say about something that someone did that was a crime that somebody committed. They come to court. So the first thing that happens is they're separated, right? They're separated and they're grilled and they're examined again by all of the judges. Where were you? Where were you standing? Where were you sitting? Where were you watching from? Right? What did they look like? What happened? What time was it? Every single detail is examined and questioned by people who know how to question people. By professionals who are seeking the truth, who know how to question human beings, who know how to question witnesses, and how to read body language. And one witness is examined in such a way, a question, and the second witness is questioned. And then the judges decide what happened. Did it happen or did it not happen? Are the witnesses legit or are they not legit? So that's the Jewish system. And the premise is that if you just take people on their word based on what they allege to have seen, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. Because people think they see lots of things that they don't see. Straight up, people believe that they see lots of things that they didn't actually see. That's it. So the question is, where does this come from? The question that I want to focus on today, as we jump into today's class with the first theme being the Kabbalah of criminology, the question is, why is that the case? Why is it that you and I can watch something happen, unfold right in front of our eyes, and then when we're asked later on to report on what happened, odds are we're going to get something wrong? Why is it? This is an open question. Jump in. Why are human beings terrible witnesses?
Because part of what you pay attention to oftentimes is your attention is drawn to it because you've either suffered a similar trauma, resolved or unresolved, or you have some connection, or there's something very visceral about what you saw, and so you focus on certain aspects of it, which causes you to miss the detail of other aspects.
Good, excellent. Good. What else?
You have a preconceived idea about what's going on.
Oh wow, it's unbelievable. Tony wrote the same thing, ego and preconceived ideas, right as you said that. So David and Tony, you guys are on the same page. In other words, you have a narrative in your head of what happened, and you're not paying attention to what's actually happening. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Okay, good. What else? What other rationales behind witnesses missing details or falsely reporting details?
Bias. So wanting to believe that something happened when it really didn't. So a bias about.
Or every stimuli or stimulus that's happening around us, we would be overwhelmed by information. There are too many things, too many sounds, and too many sights to process simultaneously. It would be an overload of information. So the human being naturally blocks out 90, I'm giving an unscientific percentage here, but the vast majority of information that's coming in, we block it out and only take in what we somehow subconsciously filter or believe is the necessary information. Many different theories, but today I want to float something else. I want to share with you another angle, which I believe came up in our discussion from just a few minutes ago. And that is, it goes back to the Kabbalistic understanding of the power of vision, the power of sight. You see, one of the themes that we learn in Kabbalah about the power of re'iyah, the power of sight, is that sight is connected with chachma, with this idea of intellectual creativity, or intellectual vision, really, a visionary understanding of something. And the meaning of chachma is that you're so connected with a thing, with an idea, the way it is in its essence, that you're not yet unpacking it to explore all of the details. So you're getting it in a way that's connecting with the essential idea as it is, but not with the way you perceive it. It's not about you, it's about it. So let me give some more oises of haspara, which means more language of explanation to make sure we're all on the same page here. Because right now, I just dropped you the chachma idea of chachma. Let me unpack it. See what I did there? I'm modeling this process. So I'm giving you the core of the concept. Now let's unpack it. There's the difference between the core and the unpacking. The core concept is what we call the nekuda, the point. So I just gave you the point of the concept. That vision is like chachma, which chachma is about it and not about you. Let's explain this now. So when you first encounter an idea on the level of chachma, which is this intellectual vision or perception. This light bulb, this flash of insight. I got it. You're connected now with an idea. What happens in that moment is you are not self-aware. It's not about you knowing it. It's about the thing being known. And there's a difference between the two. So when it's about you, it's less about it. And when it's about it, it's less about you. It's kind of like a seesaw, right? It's going to lean toward one direction or the other. Either the line, let's talk about a needle then, easier, because I don't know what to call the seesaw, the sea or the saw, whatever. The needle. Either the needle is pointing towards you or it's pointing toward it. What is your perception? What are you understanding? Is it about you or is it about it? So here's the law. Here's the formula. The Kabbalistic mathematical formula, you could draw it on a board. Here's the formula. The more it's about it, the less it's about you. And necessarily what that means is that you will not be unpacking it and understanding it as much because you're still focused on it. Whereas the more you're focused on you, the more it's all about how you perceive it, how you understand it. It takes on the contours of your understanding, and it's less about it. So the more pure your attention is on something or someone, the less you are self-aware, and the less you're processing what you're seeing. Whereas the more it's about you, the more you're processing what you're seeing, and the less accurate it is, or the less it's about what it is. So to give you an example, the simplest example that I can give, an example that we've given before in this class, is the notion of being in the flow. There was a book written a few years ago called Flow. It's about the concept of being in the zone, being in the flow, where you're so locked into an experience that you're not even aware of you being in the experience. So for example, they talk about athletes who are in the flow. So you're in a basketball game and you're shooting 3-pointers, or you're shooting free throws, and you're in this zone, you're in the flow. And you're not outside observing yourself playing the game. You're so inside that you're not even aware of you playing, you're just playing the game. This could be true in the creation of music or in the playing of music. It could be true in art, in writing and literature. It could be true in any experience that a person could really connect with, where we experience it on a level of flow where we're so locked in that we cease to be aware of ourselves and even what's going on around us. So in a sense, we lose self-awareness because we're so locked into the experience. By raise of hand, have you ever had an experience, whatever it is, where you're so locked into the experience that you lost all sense of what was going on around you? Yes? Okay. So we've all been there, right? In whatever area it is. And the reason for this, the reason that we lose that self-perception is very simple. Like I said before, it's like that seesaw. If you're aware of self, then you're not going to be so aware of that thing. If you're very aware of that thing, that activity or whatever that is, when you're hyper-focused or totally connected to that experience, you are necessarily, by definition, less connected with self. So you're not going to be focusing on, how do I feel about it? What do I think about it? How am I processing it? What's going on around me? It's not about you. It's about it. By the way, and I don't mean this in a parenthetical sense, I mean this in a critical sense. By the way, like this is the big idea about to drop. This is why Chachma, on the level of Chachma, is typically when we don't understand the concept. That's why. Why on the level of Chachma is it that we have the notion of the idea, but we don't yet understand it? The answer is simple. And the answer is simply this. It's because on the level of Chachma, we're so locked into an idea, the way the idea is, right? We're so locked into the idea, the way the concept is, and so focused on that we're not self-aware to think about, how do I understand it? How do I not understand it? What does it mean? What are the implications? All of those critical questions. How does it make sense? Why does it make sense? How does it apply to this? How does it apply to what I know? How does it impact my life? All of those wonderful, critical, analytical questions are all coming from one place: self. It's all coming from a place of self. What does it mean to me? And how do I understand it? But on the level of Chachma, it's not about you. It's about it. And when it's about it, the concept, then on that level, you're totally not aware of self and not involved at all in the process of processing the information. So let's get back to our example of criminology. So what happens? A person witnesses something big, something very important. The power of sight, vision, in Kabbalah is the power, I'm going to give you a definition. The power of re'iyah. Re'iyah in Hebrew means sight or vision. The power to see, the way the Kabbalists explain it, is the power to lock in on something and focus on something else. Vision is not about the power to see self. Vision is about the power to see something else. And when it comes to vision, when it comes to the experience of seeing something else, necessarily we are not thinking about ourselves, and necessarily we're not thinking about the most important thing that a witness needs to do, which is processing the information, analyzing the information. What were they wearing? Where were they walking? How did it all unfold? What exactly did they look like? We're not thinking about the processing of the information because we're hyper-focused on the experience itself. Especially when something big is happening in front of us, it takes us in, and we lose ourself in the vision of that thing, and it's wonderful. Again, assuming that it's a wonderful thing. It's wonderful. The concept of being lost in something is wonderful. Being in the flow, being in the zone, chachma, seeing something, connecting with something, it's a wonderful gift that we have. But it's the exact opposite. It's the arch nemesis of processing, analyzing, discerning, questioning, right? What exactly did I see? What exactly did they say? How exactly did it unfold? All of those are questions that you ask when you're self-aware. In the moment of seeing something, you are focused typically on that and not on your own questions, not on your own analysis. Does what I'm saying make sense? Yes? Give you one more example. The Kabbalah of magic. How does it work? How is it that you can watch a magic trick happen and you can't see and you're fooled and you're tricked, right? Now we love it. Now this is the disclaimer. We love being tricked when it comes to a magic trick. It's part of the fun. If you don't love it, then you don't go to a magic show or you don't watch a YouTube video of magic. Fine. But if you love it, then you love it. So it's not a negative experience, God forbid, right? Or not, God forbid. It's not a negative experience. It's a joyous experience. We love being tricked. But how does it work? So typically the understanding is, well, the hand is faster than the eye, right? The magicians are able to move their hands faster than the eye can see. There's misdirection. You draw your attention one place, and then meanwhile they're doing something elsewhere. All of those are true. But I want to tell you that the reason why magic works is because fundamentally it's playing on the strength and therefore the weakness of seeing, of the power of sight. There's a strength, but with every strength comes necessarily a weakness. Let me just focus on that point that I'm mentioning right now for a moment. In this world, in the world we live in the sandbox that we inhabit, everything has a pro and a con, a plus and a minus, a virtue and a liability. There is no such thing, right, other than God, Torah, mitzvot, etc. But there's no such thing of the human experience that is only good, which doesn't come with a flip side. Every positive has a negative. Every coin has two sides. It's the way it works. It's by definition. One of my favorite examples is a cup, right? I'm holding this cup, or I have this cup for one purpose, right? Because it's awesome. No, also because it's containing the tea that I'm drinking this morning. L'chaim. So I have this cup for the fact that it's holding the liquid inside. I have it for the inside. What about the outside? Theoretically, I don't need the outside. Now, the outside's awesome, but theoretically, I don't need the outside because it's about the inside, the contents. But I can't have the inside without an outside. Go create a cup with just the inside without an outside surface. If you've created an inside surface, then automatically you have an outside surface. Are you with me? Can you imagine a scenario where you would create a cup and only have the inside but not have an outside? You can't have an inside without the outside. And the same thing is true in life. And that is, every coin has two sides. You can't have good without bad, and you can't have bad without good. It's not even good or bad. It is what it is. So what that means for us is like this. The virtue, the benefit, the gift of vision, it's not just about seeing. That's on a biological level. Let's get to the concept of seeing. What's the power of sight all about? It's the ability that you and I have to totally lose ourselves within something else or someone else. Because when we look at something, we cease to focus on self and we're taken by that experience. That's why the visual is so powerful. It takes us in and we become drawn into that space. So, if you want to think about it on an energy level, vision is about moving out of self and into the space of that thing that we are observing. That's what Chachma is. It's moving out of our own heads and into the space of a new concept, of a new idea. Right? Seeing someone, something, or experiencing something powerful that we're beholding is about getting out of self and losing ourselves in that experience. That's very powerful. But it comes at a cost. There's a flip side. There's a downside. Or even if you don't want to judge it good, bad, or ugly, there's the other side. And what's the other side of sight? What's the other side of losing self? Which is great. You're becoming absorbed into that experience. It's wonderful. It's powerful. Nothing as powerful as the visual. What's the problem? Or what's the potential challenge? The potential challenge is that when you lose yourself in the visual, then you're not self-aware. And when you're not self-aware, you're not paying attention. When you're not paying attention, then necessarily you're not processing certain details that you might find important or that you might find necessary. And so that's why, when it comes to magic, the Kabbalah of magic, you're watching something happen. You're so delighted by the showmanship. You're so delighted by the visual. You're so delighted by the experience that you stop critically paying attention to the details. By the way, if you watch the trick and were paying attention to the details, then guess what? You weren't watching the trick. You weren't watching it. You were analyzing it. You weren't watching it. There's a difference. If you're watching the trick, right, on a recorded thing and you're pausing it. Okay, what did he do? What did she do? Where was the hand? Where was, if you're analyzing like that, then you're not being lost in the experience. It's either or. Either you're losing yourself in the experience or you're analyzing the experience. You can't have it both ways. If you're analyzing, then you're not losing yourself. If you're losing yourself in the experience, you're not analyzing the experience. It's either it or you. It's either the experience or your own awareness of the experience. So what is the power of sight? The power of sight is the ability that you and I have, for better or for worse, to lose ourselves in an experience. It's flow in our senses. The experience of being in the zone, in the flow, on a sensory level is the power, is the sense of sight. To be able to see something is to be able to lose oneself in that experience. To be able to analyze something is to hear something. Kabbalah says analysis is akin to the power, to the sense of hearing. If the magician described to you everything that he or she was doing in the trick, it wouldn't be a magic trick. Now I'm going to, right? Imagine, I can't even articulate a magic trick, but because I don't have one in my head. But imagine if David Copperfield, right? Or David Blaine, or Houdini. I'm just giving you the Jewish magicians. All right? Imagine if any of these magicians or mentalists or whoever it is, imagine if any of them verbally described, truthfully, everything they're doing. Would it be a trick? Of course not. Now I'm pretending to put the card back in the deck, but in truth, I mean, if they described with words every step that they're doing, would it be a trick? Of course not. So when it comes, good morning. No, not yet. When it comes to analysis, right? Analysis is akin to hearing. Hearing happens in a linear way, step by step, with you critically analyzing, okay, I'm hearing this, okay, yes or no makes sense, yes or no, okay, let's move on to the next idea. You're telling me something else, yes or no, next, something else, yes or no. When we hear, it's linear. People lay down stories step by step by step, and every step of the way, the listening mind, the listening person is analyzing. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Do I understand it? How do I understand it? How am I processing it? It's very much a self-oriented processing process. Hearing is. It's about self. Seeing is about losing self. Hearing is about gaining self. What I mean by losing and gaining self is as follows. When I see something, again, you can see something and essentially hear it also. It's fine, right? You can see something and analyze it, and to the point that you're not even seeing it, you're hearing it because you're analyzing it. What I mean by seeing it is being lost in the experience that you're seeing, being so taken by what you're seeing that you are losing yourself. You're not aware of self in that moment. You're aware of that. It's beautiful. It's painful. It's astonishing. It's magnificent. It's awe-inspiring. It's provocative. Whatever it is, it takes you completely and it takes you out of yourself. That's what seeing is at its core. And hearing at its core is about analysis. How do I understand it? How do I process it? Does the story make sense? Does it not make sense? Etc. So,
Rabbi, you're assuming that hearing is just about words. So if you're listening to music, you're not going to be analyzing it in that way.
Correct. There is a way to get lost in the process of hearing, or with the sense of hearing, and there is a way to be analytical with the process of seeing. This is where there's a crossover. But at its core, the way it's explained, at least the way these two senses are contrasted, for the sake of clarity, right? For the sake of the lessons that we gain from the contrast. But it's by no means, as you're correctly stating, it's by no means a rigid, definition. But there's benefit that comes from this, at least, kind of broad contrast. The contrast is that seeing typically is about a visual, right? That we are taking in at once and losing ourselves within, whereas hearing, in the context of hearing ideas, is typically a step-by-step, linear process by which at every point of the way we're hyper-aware of self, of how we're processing the ideas. Now, could we lose ourselves in hearing something? Absolutely. But typically the default setting of hearing is I'm thinking about it, whereas seeing is I'm taken by this experience, taken by the moment.
I'm struggling with that a little bit because I'm not sure if you can really make that clear of a dichotomy between them, because there's such complex processes. You know, there's seeing, and then there's perception. There's several different. The visual system itself is so complex. There's ways in which it sort of crosses over as it's being processed several times. And I think hearing is the same thing. And then you want to sort of factor in, well, what about somebody who has no sight? And how do they see through their ears and so on? So I think I'm just struggling a little bit with it as such a clear dichotomy.
Right, and I think
so complex.
No, it makes 100% sense. I totally get it. But I think that you are perfectly modeling what we're talking about, hearing and analyzing. Because I'm explaining verbally the concepts of hearing and seeing, and you're thinking about it, and you're wondering how that makes sense, right? Based on everything that you know about hearing and seeing, you're thinking like, but that doesn't exactly line up with what I know or what we know about hearing and seeing. And that's perfect. And that's perfect. That's exactly what we're doing when we're hearing, is we're analyzing.
But this situation isn't an analytical one. So we are not engaged in that just sort of pure way. So by talking about this, we have entered with you at a level of analysis.
Correct, right. And the way, exactly, 100.
So what I'm doing is in response to what you're, to the context that we have right now, but doesn't mean that that's always what I would be doing with hearing.
Correct. No, so I'm agreeing with every single thing that you're saying. The way Kabbalah is explaining hearing and seeing and hearing is the difference between being taken by something versus analyzing something. So hearing is synonymous with the process of processing and learning and analyzing and discovering information, whereas seeing is about beholding something and being drawn into something. It's not about understanding, that's bina, right? That's hearing. It's about beholding something. It's about seeing something. So could there be the physical sense of seeing? That's hearing, that's analytical. Could there be the sense of hearing that is being drawn in or taken by? 100% yes. But there's at least an initial, before we break down the boundaries and say both have both, there's an initial approach by saying, okay, seeing primarily, or at least in this context, seeing we're going to call the experience of getting out of self, and hearing is very much involved in self. Doesn't mean that the actual senses are rigidly drawn along those lines and cannot be used for the opposite. It doesn't even mean that in any individual's experience that one sense might even be used primarily for the other, for the other aim or the other objective or for the other experience. It could very well be that on an individual level, for example, somebody who can't see, so their hearing takes it in. Doesn't mean that when we listen to music, we're not taken in by the experience and we lose ourselves in the experience. Absolutely, 100%. So it doesn't mean any of that. What it means is simply like this. We can use a physical example of seeing certain things and hearing certain things that gives us an insight into what Chachma and Bina are about. So it's not a rigid definition of what this sense is or what it's not. It's really more about understanding these two modalities of being. So whether or not our seeing is primarily this way or hearing is primarily that way or whatever it is, we all know in our experience that we've seen things that have taken our breath away. And by the way, we've also heard things in the same way. But let's stick with the Kabbalistic explanation, because that's what we have in our text. So we've all seen things that have taken us in. And at the same time, we've also heard things that have very much been part of a process of processing, and we heard something and we analyzed it and we were critical and thinking about it. Do I agree with it? Do I disagree with it? How can I make sense of it? How do I connect it, or how do I reconcile it with the other things that I know, etc., etc., etc. So, but we all know these two processes of how either, and it's not either or, but it's sometimes we're in a mode of losing self and taking in the scene. Sometimes we're in a mode of analyzing. What's at the core is not really seeing versus hearing. What's at the core is really self or no self, or to put it in the right order, no self versus self. When the experience is not about self, then we're taken by the experience. Then we lose ourselves in the experience. When it's about self, then we're very much taking in. We're very much analyzing. We're very much, it's a critical analytical experience, because we're thinking and because we're in a state of self. Now, so getting back to the two examples that I'm giving, the Kabbalah of criminology and the Kabbalah of magic, the greater or the more impactful the experience, the bigger the thing that just happened in front of us, the less likely it is that we're going to remember what happened. That's the way it is. The bigger the deal, the less likely we'll have a very organized memory of the details that happened. Why? Because it was so big, it took us in completely. It was so big, we got lost in what we saw. And we weren't thinking about, let me get, on a very simple level. For somebody to witness, let's just talk about a crime, somebody to witness a crime, God forbid, and to have the wherewithal to say, let me run out of my home and jump into my car and follow this vehicle and take a picture of the license plate, that means that one is very much aware of one's own either responsibility or one's own role or one's own help that one can give in this situation. But a person is very much aware of themselves, as opposed to if somebody is astonished, surprised, or overwhelmed by what they just saw. They're less likely to have paid attention or to be able to pay attention to the details, because that involves the critical part, the analytical part of one's being, which is connected with a self-awareness. The more one is aware of what is happening, the less one is aware of self and processing. And the same thing is true with magic. When a person is hyper aware, when a person is super aware of the spectacle in front of them, the spectacle itself, the less one is in a mode of analyzing every detail of what's happening. You're drawn by the spectacle, and then you're surprised by what happened. Well, I didn't see that coming. Yeah, of course, because we weren't analyzing every step of the process. Now, one could argue when it comes to magic, even if you did analyze it, there are still things that you can't see, or you wouldn't believe, or you wouldn't imagine the techniques that are being done. And it's all techniques, obviously. So you couldn't anticipate it. So even if you did analyze it, you still couldn't anticipate it. True, 100%. But in general, the reason why magic works is because the person is focused on the sight, on the experience, and less focused on self and analysis. And the truth is, we give up self when it comes to magic, because we want to be amused, because we want to be thrilled, we want that exhilaration of the surprise. So we intentionally surrender self to focus on spectacle, so that we do have that element of surprise. All right, those are my takes on criminology and magic. Make sense? On any level? Yes, a little bit? Okay. All right. Fine. Take it for what it's worth. These are my examples. These are this is not brought in the Kabbalistic works. They don't, at least in my experience, they don't, actually no, there's a talk about witnesses and whatnot, but criminology on this level of magic. Again, they're not perfect examples. They're my examples. So take it with a grain of salt. But I hope that it's giving some more language of explanation, of understanding for these concepts that, if we just study them in their original Kabbalistic form, could be theoretical concepts. I want to take, my goal with these classes is to take concepts that otherwise might be theoretical Kabbalah and make it practical and have the experience together where it where it means something for us and relates to our lives.
Rabbi, may I say something?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I feel like in our current day with social media that there's a new dimension. So like I've been at concerts where the majority of people are not watching the concert. They're more concerned about filming the concert.
Right.
So they seem to be in a complete, and are they ever going to watch that video? So, they seem to, I don't know, it's just so hard. They're not in the experience, and they're not, the camera's analyzing it. So I don't know, that seems to be a whole new era.
I agree with you. I think it's fascinating to observe that. My joke is always like, imagine at the Red Sea, with splitting of the sea. Imagine if it happened today in 2020. Can you imagine Moses like, folks, no more selfies. We gotta go. The Egyptians are coming. I know this is gonna be great for your feed, for your Insta feed. We gotta go. TikTok, you can do this later. We'll recreate it or something. Folks, we gotta move. The Egyptians are literally approaching. Let's keep it moving. All the tribes keep moving forward. I could just imagine because that would be that could be a problem, right? It's a very interesting thing. Right? Are we there, or are we... David is writing, Jake Blakesberg, photographer for the Grateful Dead, gives a... Hold on, let me see what you're writing. Gives a great talk on this change of concert audiences to be in the moment. Oh, good. We got to check that out then. So that's a great example, and I'm glad that somebody is talking about it, somebody who's connected with, music and concerts. So it's a real thing of being lost in the experience versus analyzing the experience as we're having the experience, and therefore essentially one might argue never actually having the experience. Because if the experience consisted of analyzing it, then did you ever have the experience? And I think that's the core. That's the core concept, is either you're in it or you're observing it. And it's one of those two. Not like you can't do both, in life. You can do both, but not at the same time. So either in this one moment, either you're in it or you're looking at it. It's either you're lost in it or you're observing it, in or out. And that is at the core of Chachma and Bina. Chachma is you're lost in the idea, to the point that if somebody asks you, so tell me, explain it to me, you'll say, I can't. I can't. Because you don't understand it. You're lost in the idea. You're not analyzing the idea from the outside in. You're inside the idea. Chachma is about being connected, being placed, being found inside the experience, the intellectual experience. You're in the idea. You're in that moment. It's an exhilarating experience. It's that the lightning flash goes off, the light bulb goes off, suddenly there's a clarity, and you're connected with a concept. But what concept? What does it mean? Explain it. You can't. Why? Because you're not looking, you're not observing the idea. You're lost inside the idea. And what's Bina? Bina, which is the next intellectual power, the next step of the mind, is stepping out of the idea and looking at the idea from the outside in. Now we take pictures of it from all the angles, and then we look at all the pieces, and we look at all of the angles, and we make sense of it, and we sort it, and we adjust it, we analyze it, to the point that we make sense of it. It's a very different experience. It's either losing ourselves in the concert or taking pictures of the concert. It's a different thing. It's a different experience. Either we're in it or we're out of it. And by the way, this is not a judgment to say one is better than the other intellectually. What the point of this is to say that these are two very different experiences. You and I could decide at some point which we think is more valuable or less valuable, and that's a judgment that we might apply based on our analysis of this, but it's really not about better or worse. It's about clarity and distinction. It's about understanding that there are two different modalities of perception, of knowing, of understanding. Hey, Ellie. They're two different oh, this is the rally keeper. You know, like in baseball games, when your team is down, so you turn your hat up, inside out. This is what we call a rally keeper. Oh, you want to show it? Okay, all right. So the goal of this conversation that we're having is my intention is clarity. There are two experiences. You can either be inside something, but know this: if you're in it, you're not seeing it. Sorry, bad choice of words. If you're in it, you're not observing it. You're not analyzing it. You're in it. If you're out of it, you're observing, analyzing, but you're not in it. That's why I'm saying, when something dramatic happens in front of us, and we're a witness, we see it, it happens right in front of us. Oh my God, that just happened. If it's strong enough and big enough to take us in completely, there's probably no chance that your analysis of it is happening at the same time. You're not, because you're not analyzing it. So the odds of you having paid attention to be able to intelligibly, in other words, like faithfully and accurately report what you saw, right? The details of what you saw, the odds are so small because you weren't analyzing. Maybe you were, but in my example, you weren't. I'm giving you a scenario because you were so caught up in what you just saw. You were so taken by what you saw. You weren't doing the analysis process from the outside. Oh, interesting. They were wearing this. They were walking that way. They looked like this. You weren't looking at it like that. You were inside of it. It took you in, for better or for worse. And that's why we don't make for faithful witnesses. We don't make for faithful depictors or portrayers of what we just saw. Here's the rule. The bigger it is, the more it took us in, the less likely we will be to be able to faithfully represent it, retell it later. That's the way it is. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't report anything. It doesn't mean like it's an unconscious experience where you have no recollection of it. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the details, right? Those are born of analysis. And the analysis is born of observing from the outside. Observing from in a sense, somewhat of a detached place. Where you can think to yourself, hold on, what am I seeing? What are they wearing? What do they look like? What do they do? Where do they go? These are a lot of things to process and a lot of details to take in, which you're not, typically human beings, you're not going to take in if you're inside that experience. Right, Ellie? Yes? Do you agree? Yes? Yes.
I was watching Ellie's magic trick.
Ellie is appearing and disappearing, or disappearing and appearing. That's pretty cool. So again, either you're in or you're out. And it's not a judgment, better or worse. Which is better, Chachma or Bina? I don't know. We have both. What's better? Again, it's not a perfect example. Seeing or hearing. Which is better? Which is better? There are two abilities that we have. We have the ability to be lost, to be in the flow, and completely oblivious to what's around us. And we have the ability to be a little bit detached and a little bit analytical and observing something with the intention of, let me make sense of it. We have both abilities. Better or worse? No better or worse. Two abilities, and they're both wonderful. But my point today is, it's typically, your mileage may vary, typically one or the other. Either we're going to be inside of it to the point that, and then not have an accurate outside view of it, or we're going to be inside of it. Or we're going to be outside of it, but not be connected in that same way. Make sense? Okay. The greatest magicians then would be the greatest storytellers, the greatest visual artists. The goal is to draw you in to the point that you're so absorbed by what you're seeing that you're not actually seeing. Right? The goal is to draw you in so that you're so connected with the spectacle that you're not sitting outside saying, oh, he's doing this, she's doing that, they're doing the other. The goal is to draw you in. Okay. Hope that made sense. So let's now jump back inside our text. Because what we're doing in chapter 24 of our text, which is a very pivotal chapter of the Kabbalistic text that we're studying called Hecholzu, or the English title that I've given it is Learning How to Love. The objective, there's the big objective, but the immediate objective of chapter 24 is to better understand the difference between Chachma and Bina. The typical translation of Chachma and Bina. You ready for the typical translations? You look up the English word. Chachma is wisdom and Bina is understanding. Those English words tell us nothing about the energy of Chachma and Bina, the difference between them, what it means for us in our lives, nothing. That's why the English, in this case, absolutely fails. Chachma and Bina are this. Chachma is getting lost in an idea, and Bina is analyzing the idea. That's what it is, very simply. Stated simply, Chachma is getting lost in the idea, and Bina is analyzing the idea. Inside, outside. That's why Chachma, on the level of Chachma, when you have a Chachma moment, you can't explain it. Why? Because you don't yet have an outside look to explain the contours of what you're seeing. You're inside of it. How can you explain the parameters of it? If you're inside something, how do you know where it starts and where it stops? You're inside of it. You can only see the contours when you're outside. When you're outside the experience, then you can say, oh, it's square, it's round, it's a trapezoid, then you can comment on the contours of that shape. When you're inside of it, you're lost in the experience. Chachma is simply this. It's when the human mind connects with a concept, with a new concept, with a concept in such a way that the mind loses all sense of self and analysis. Totally swept up in the beauty and the grandeur and the experience of the idea. That's what Chachma is. It's that moment of creativity. It's the moment of brilliance. It's the moment of being lost in an idea. And what's Bina? Bina is when we take an idea that's outside of us, put it under a microscope, and analyze it. Understand its contours, where it works, where it doesn't work, when it works, how it works, why it works. That's what Bina is. Bina is analysis, analytical. But it's being outside of the idea, outside the experience. Once you're outside, now you can explain it. Easy. It starts here, it stops there, it works there, it doesn't work there. Once you're outside, you can explain the contours. When you're inside, you're lost. Which is better, which is worse? I don't know. Two different experiences. The point of chapter 24 is to really understand, to Bina, from the outside, is to really get the difference between Chachma and Bina. Is to really understand the difference between the experience of Chachma and the experience of Bina. Because the more we understand the difference between them, the more shocking it will be the fact that they work together in tandem. The most unlikely pair will works together consistently in our minds. And that's going to be the astonishing fact. But one more label that I want to put on Chachma and Bina. We talked about seeing and hearing. We talked about inside outside, right? Being in the flow versus analyzing it. Okay. But I want to give you one more label, or one more dualistic label. Ego, no ego. Selfless, self. Chachma is selfless. Why? Losing self. You're not aware. You're losing self. You're taken by the moment. You're letting go of self and absorbed in the moment. That's what Chachma is. You're lost in the beauty of the idea. You're completely lost. Somebody asks you, so what is it? Can you explain it to me? I can't. Why not? You understand it? No. So what are you doing? I'm swimming. I'm swimming in the idea. I'm surrendered to the idea. It's losing self. It's bittul. It's ayin. I'm giving you Hebrew words here. Bittul means self-nullification. Ayin means nothingness. It's a surrender. It's an act of letting go. Bina, on the other hand, is an act of holding on. It's an act of I. It's an act of my understanding, my analysis, my perspective, my organizing this idea. Bina is very much a power and an experience where the I is present. Chachma, there's no I, just it, just the idea. There's no you. The only you is lost in the idea. It's not you, it's the idea that you're sensing. Bina, you're sensing you. And how do you manifest in this moment? What in was besteht? It works better in Yiddish. How are you expressed? You are analyzing an idea, but it's about you. You with me on this? Chachma is about the idea. And what about you? You're lost in the idea. There's no you. There's the idea. And what about Bina? Bina is about you. And what about the idea? Oh, the idea is what you are analyzing, but it's about you. So one experience is about it, and one is about you. Chachma is ayin, it's bittul, it's letting go, it's nullification, it's surrender, it's getting lost, which, by the way, is so freeing and so liberating and so exquisitely pleasurable. The most pleasurable moments in life oftentimes are the ones in which we completely surrendered and let go. Think about moments of pleasure and ecstasy, and how that's typically connected with letting go and just being in that experience, being in that moment. That's what Chachma is. And what's Bina? Bina is very different. Bina is I. Bina is me. I'm not losing self. I'm very much aware of self. And what am I doing now? I'm analyzing an idea and making sense of it. What does it mean to me? How does it make sense? How do I understand it? Now, the gift of Bina is, now I can explain it to someone else. Now I understand it. That's the gift of Bina. The gift of Chachma is surrender, losing self, connecting purely with something else. So understand this. Chachma and Bina can be experienced on every level in life, in a relationship, right? How present are you in that relationship? Chachma or Bina? Is it about them? Is it about you? When you're with them, right? When you're with the other person, are you lost in the moment? Are you just purely connected with them? Or are you stepping back and saying, this is what they're doing, this is what I'm doing, this is what we're doing, this is what I'm saying, this is what they're saying? Are we outside the experience? Now, relationships, we have to have both modalities. We have to be lost in the other, and also we have to think about the other. Fine. But in life, in general, there are these two modalities. Being lost in the experience or being very much, I'm going to say aware, analyzing the experience. But they're not the same thing. They're just simply not the same thing. And at the core is I or no I. Is it, am I present or am I not present? If I'm present, then it's going to be a bina moment. It's going to be an analytical moment, the outside in. If there's no I, that means I'm lost in the moment. And all I feel is the moment. Again, in general, the pleasure, tainug, in Hebrew, tainug, pleasure, is experienced typically when we let go of self. When we let go of self. When we're aware, right, like what Donna said before, when we're taking the pictures, taking the selfie, right, at the concert, again, I'm not judging anyone's concert experiences. I'm just going to say that it would make sense, at least logically, to argue that if that's the case, you're not fully connected with the experience. And if you're not fully connected with the experience, then there's something will be taken away from the pleasure. Now you could say, well, somebody has pleasure in recording it, but then that's their experience. See, I think now we might be at a state of humanity where being in the experience means being in your experience of observing the experience, which might be a different type of experience, and that might be what people are seeking. People are seeking experiences where they lose themselves within the experience of observing the experience. Now that might sound like super meta, but it is what it is. That might be where we're at, and that's a different thing. There's losing oneself in the other experience, the sensation, whatever it is, versus self. Holding on to self. That's what it comes down to. Letting go of self, holding on to self. We need both. Let me clarify. We need both. But they're two different powers. Chachma and Bina. Okay, so without further ado, and let me just quickly look through comments. Thank you for the positive comments in the chat box. Thank you. Okay, good. Let's jump back into the text. We're going to start the text in about 60 seconds, 90 seconds. You can get up, you can walk around, you can grab a drink. Take a minute or so while I open up the file, and we're going to jump in just a moment. By the way, this is a good opportunity for anybody that wants to jump in, unmute yourself. I won't be able to read the chats because I'm opening up the file, the text that we're studying. But if you want to unmute and ask or comment, feel free to jump in now. Now's a good time. Always no pressure, but if you want. Okay. Let's pull up our text. By the way, for those interested, the original publisher of this text that we're studying in English, so they just reissued. They're working on a version that has commentary and explanation. That's at least my understanding, but they just reissued, I think, a few weeks ago. They just reissued this book in a new edition. They didn't do much editorial on it, but they put it out because it's been out of print for a while. So if you're interested in it, you can just look up. You know what? Maybe I can make it easier for everybody. Bum, 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 bum. New books. I can't find it. Here we go. I think this is it. Dropping it in the chat box for those that are interested. I believe that's the book just reissued now. Back to catalog, it says. That should be our discourse that we're studying on Avas Yisrael, a path to true unity, they're calling it. Okay, hey Cholso. Fine. So if anybody, again, the reason why we've been, I haven't mentioned the book up until now is because it's been out of print for probably a decade or more. It looks like they just reissued, even looks soft cover because they're only selling it for $6 on that website, on the publisher's website. Looks like they just reissued a soft cover. So if you want to hold something in your hand as we study it, then that might be an option. I can't vouch for the pagination, if the page numbers will be the same as the ones that were, the PDF that I have, but it is what it is. I just wanted to share that with you. Okay, without further ado, let me share my screen and let's jump in. So we talked last week about the stars, the constellations. We spoke about Notzer, Venake. All right, we spoke about lots of Kabbalistic things, but let's pick it up. Here we go. Right here, Chachma and Bina. Chachma and Bina. I'm highlighting it right now. Can everybody see my screen? Thumbs up? Yes? Showing up? Okay, good. All right, I'm going to read. Chachma and Bina. Chachma, we said before, is vision, sight, losing oneself, flow, etc. Bina is outside, somewhat disconnected, or observing from the outside. It's connected with self, and analysis, etc. So Chachma and Bina, they flow respectively from the mazalos in Ashkenazic terminology, and from the mazalos of Notzer and Venake. This is, I don't want to jump deeply back into this. That was last week's conversation. Of the 13 attributes of divine mercy, we have Notzer and Venake, two different expressions of divine compassion. Notzer means Notzer Chesed, God withholds his kindness or preserves kindness for 2,000 generations. Venake means, and he cleanses and he forgives. So one is about drawing in, and one is about putting out. One is about expressing outward. So Chachma, he says, is the flow of ayin and of bittul, the two words that I mentioned to you before. Ayin means nothingness, and bittul means self-nullification, which makes out of something a separate entity, a nothing. Right? Chachma is always about turning a something into a nothing. Right? Turning oneself, which is a something, into a nothing. Losing oneself. Losing oneself in an idea. It's about turning a something into a nothing. It's about undoing self. That's what Chachma is. Hence, Chachma is called Koachma. Again, a theme that we've explained in previous sessions. Chachma, if you take the Hebrew word Chachma, it's comprised of 4 letters. Chachma, I'm very tempted to do this. Give me a second. I could explain it to you, or I could show it to you. So let me show it to you. Chachma that's Chachma in Hebrew. Ches, Chaf, Mem, He. You could also write it Koachma. Right? Just switch around the first 2 letters. The Ches and the Chaf spells the word Koach, which means power. Like koach, power, strength, and ma means ma nishtana. It's a question. Why? What? Right? So what? So what is chachma? It's the power of what? Right? It's the unknown. It's losing self. It's not understanding something. It's losing oneself in the concept, like I explained before. All right. Let's get back into our text. So hence chachma right here. Hence chachma is called koach ma. The power of, what is it? Right? It's the power of the unknown, the power of the question. For it is essentially a ma, a what? In other words, even as it exists, it is a non-entity. And this shouldn't be esoteric. This should be, the goal of these classes is to take the esoteric and make it understandable for you and I. That's my entire, well, not the entire picture, but that's a major objective of these classes, of these Kabbalah classes. So if this sounds like, whoa, like this is so deep and so heady, then I'm not doing my job. Because what it says over here is that when Chachma is essentially, this line, it is essentially a ma, a what, even as it exists, it is a non-entity. You and I should know what that means by now. You and I should know what that means is that in the experience of Chachma, as you get Chachma, you don't get it. As you say, wow, I see it, what an idea. Somebody asks you to explain it, you can't explain it. Why? Because you're lost in the idea. Because even as it exists, it's a non-entity. Why is it a non-entity? Because you're not outside observing it and entitying it. I just use it as a verb. You're not making it into a thing with parameters because you're so drawn into it. Because of your ayin, it also is ayin. Because of your bittul, it is also in a state of bittul. Because in the experience of Chachma, you are losing yourself in the experience. You're losing yourself. You're flowing in the experience. Because you're not analyzing from the outside. You're inside of it. Because of that, you can't explain it. And it's a non-entity in the sense of an entity being something that has a neat box tied around it. Chachma itself is the epitome of bittul. The experience of Chachma is bittul, losing self. It's going into the, it's not standing where you are and saying, let me look at that idea. Oh, that's an interesting idea. I like that idea. I don't like that idea. That's you staying, digging your heels in and saying, let me look at ideas. That's not what Chachma is. That's what Bina is. It's not Chachma. Chachma is, you're on the diving board, you jump in and you surrender to the idea. You let go of you and jump into the sea of ideas. Chachma itself is the epitome of bittul, losing oneself. And therefore, it exists the way we experience it, as only a point lacking external expression. What that means is, when we're having the experience of Chachma, therefore we can't explain it. Because we lost ourselves in it, therefore it's bigger than us. We've surrendered to the idea. It's bigger than us. And now we can't explain it. Go explain it. I'm swimming in it. I can't explain it. Let me jump out of the pool. Let me take a drone and go up above it. And then I'll tell you how big the pool is. How much water is in it. I'll measure it from the outside. I'm in it. I can't measure it. Likewise, it brings bittul on all levels. The experience of Chachma, that surrender to the idea. The idea itself is pure and elevated, and it's not the way I understand it subjectively. It is objective. I can't explain it yet because I'm in it. It's bittul, it's losing self on every single level. Accordingly, and this is what I was talking about before, seeing. Why? Because again, your mileage may vary, and different experiences, different contexts, I get it. But in general, Chachma is called seeing, Re'iyah. Why is it called seeing? Because what happens when we see, typically, is we're taken by the visual. When we're hearing, we're more likely to be in a state of analysis, observing it from the outside, because we're not in it. Yes, we could be listening to music, which could take us in, and we could lose ourselves in the music. Fine, but on a level of ideas, when we see something, we're taken in, by it completely. As our sages say, who is wise? Here, I don't know why because of gender. Who is a wise man? But who is wise? Ezehu chacham. Who is one who is called wise? Haroa et hanolad. He who sees what is born. In other words, that is, he who sees how all things are brought about from nothingness. What that means is, what is a chacham? What is a wise person? Who is a wise person? What does it mean? It means when you're connected with the thing itself on its level, not on your level. It's when you see how all things are brought about from nothingness. In other words, when you see its origins as opposed to your origins. When you're looking at something from the inside out, from its inside out, not from your vantage point outside, external to the thing. When you're in it, that's what Chachma is. This wisdom leads to bittul, losing oneself. Generally, Chachma is the quality of seeing the essence of things. This is huge, that line. Chachma is the quality of seeing the essence of things. You know what that means, the essence of things? From the inside out. That means you're not being a stickler for the details. You're not, oh, that's a white shirt, a gray shirt, a blue tie. You're not looking at the details. If you're looking at the details, you are not seeing the essence. That's it. You can have one or the other. Zero-sum game. You cannot be immersed in the essence and also observing the details. You observe the details when you are detached, when you are within yourself, and now you're looking objectively at the details. That's not seeing the essence. Chachma is seeing the essence of things. Seeing the essence back inside leads to the absolute nullification of one's being. That's what we're talking about. Surrender. As for example, when one sees a king whose overwhelming presence causes one to lose one's sense of self. The sense of sight has a most powerful impact on the viewer, as is explained elsewhere at length in the discussion on the difference between seeing and hearing. And this is what I was talking about before. You can hear about the king or you can see the king. Hear about the king. Oh, wow, ooh, fancy, schmancy, the king, powerful, blah, blah, blah. You can hear about the king. But there you are in your living room and someone's telling you about the majesty of the king. And it's an interesting story. And then you can be standing there in front of the king and you lost all your faculties. And you can't speak. And the king asks you your name and you can't even answer. Why? Because you've lost yourself. Because you've lost yourself in the moment. It's bigger than you, and you've surrendered in the moment to that experience or to that person, and that's it. So a simple question as, what's your name? You can't even answer. Why? Because you're not in yourself at that moment. You're in a deeper experience. That's the power of sight. So you can hear about the king. Somebody could tell you the king and a throne and a robe and a scepter and a crown and power and all the wonderful descriptions about a king. Interesting. Wow. Sounds amazing. Wow. And you have a picture in your mind. Wonderful. That's you sitting on your couch picturing a king. Mazel tov. You're very much who you are, and from your comfy vantage point, you're imagining a king. Very different is the experience when you're standing in front of the king, who has literally the power of life and death over you. Now, you and I can't relate to that, because all right? But back in the day, like when this was written, or shortly before this was written, when the king in Russia was the norm, that's how they lived. This was a very, very relatable example. You're standing in front of the king, looking at the king. You don't exist. There's a bittul there. There's a surrender. Whether you like it or not, you're going to feel that surrender. So, here we go. Back inside. Even when the amorphous point of Chachma is conceptualized and revealed within Chachma, in other words, even when you start understanding or appreciating a little bit more that which you have surrendered to, it is still above the level of hearing of Bina. For the essence is seen and revealed in it. And again, it's a zero-sum game. If what you're perceiving is essence, then you're not perceiving the external details. If you're perceiving the external details, then you're not perceiving the essence. It's one or the other in this context. The above aspects of Chachma are all derived from the mazel, from the constellation of Notzer, which, as we said last week, is the flow of ayin and bittul, nothingness and surrender. That's all Chachma. I'm going to continue for another 2 or 3 minutes until we finish the end of this chapter, because it's all stuff that we discussed, but we're just reading it inside. Bina, on the other hand, Bina, see, just 2 more paragraphs. Bina comes from the mazel of Vinake, completely different energy, whose function is expansion to create a specific, maybe more precisely defined yesh, an entity with an existence of its own. So, Notzer, Chachma's mazel, Chachma's star is all about losing self-surrender. Vinake, Bina's mazel, Bina's star, is all about defining self. I am. I am. It entails understanding. Oh, now once you are, forget you, not forget you, but let me keep it with me. Once I am, if my approach is I am, and then you put a new idea in front of me, so then I am, what is this? How does this fit? How do I understand it? How do I make sense of it? But the starting point is I am. So now you have a new piece of information. Oh, what does this mean to me? Because the foundation is ego, self. So Bina stems from the posture of I. From the posture of I, it then leads to a specific action. It therefore entails understanding the numerous specifics of a subject in all its length and breadth. I understand it, what it means, what it does, why it does, all the things I understand because I am. The light of this of the concept in Bina is grasped consciously. In other words, I'm not losing myself in the idea. Chachma is I am not. Who am I? What am I? Koach matz, the power of what? I don't exist. Only the idea exists. And I'm swimming and delighting in the idea. That's Chachma. Bina is I am. So now you put a new idea in front of me? Interesting. Let me analyze it. Let me see what it does for me. Do I understand it? How do I understand it? What does it mean? So I consciously grasp it. I consciously grasp it. There is a certain advantage in this. Look what he says here. Bina, like I said, it's not a judgment of better or worse. There's a certain advantage in Bina, inasmuch as it is experienced more inwardly. The vitality, and he explains, the vitality and delight in the divine conception that one grasps with one's mind are revealed more consciously within oneself, not so in Chachma, where they are concealed and intangible. When it comes, let's talk about a divine concept, understanding God. Chachma is delighting in God. It's pleasure in God. It's losing oneself in the divine experience. And that's wonderful. What's Bina? I am. Let me think about God. I am. Let's meditate, analyze, let's figure out God. He says there's an advantage to that, to the analysis. Why? Because when I do figure it out, then I can understand it. Then it means something to me. Then I have it broken down in my head and in my heart. So on a pure level of essential connection, Chachma obviously is the hero of that story. But when it comes to understanding, internalizing, getting, that's where Bina comes in. And Bina is derived from the mazel of Vinake, which brings about a yesh. Again, Vinake is that constellation, that element from the 13 attributes of mercy, that source, Bina, and that brings about yesh, or being, isness. Thus, and this is the final point of this chapter, and really the big takeaway. Thus, Chachma and Bina, as well as their respective sources, the mazalot, the stars, the constellations of Notzer and Vinake, are the antithesis of each other. They are polar opposites. Surrender or self, right? Selflessness or ego. Swimming or observing. Which one is it? Two different postures that are not just different. They're the antithesis, the exact polar opposite of each other. Chachma can therefore exist without Bina, and Bina can exist without Chachma, for their sources are separate, nay, opposite. And then here's the big kicker, and here's the final punch. Nevertheless, the point of Chachma usually comes to be understood through Bina, for Chachma and Bina incorporate each other. Chachma and Bina, as opposite as they are, as opposite, come say hi to everybody. As opposite as they are, Chachma and Bina still work together. They still incorporate each other. They still work hand in hand with each other, despite how different they are. You might think, night and day. There's no way they can work together. One is about surrender. One is about self. One is from the inside. One is from the outside. What connection do they have? They work together. What we originally swam inside, now we analyze. What started off as Chachma, now we Bina it. Now we understand it. That's the way the mind works. It starts off Chachma and then it progresses into Bina. Even though they're different and opposites and come from different and opposite sources, they still work together. This too is the case with their sources, the Mazalot of Notzer and Venake. They're different Mazalot, they're different stars, they're different energies, but guess what? They incorporate each other and they work together. How? Next week, we're going to explore this mystery. How two opposites can come together. And I want to give you a clue. How can two opposites work together? Understanding this is understanding the mystery of life. When I say mystery of life, the mystery of what I maintain is the greatest challenge of our generation and of the last 2,000 years, which is simply this: how to get along with somebody else. Somebody who's different, nay, opposite than you. How can you get along with someone who is different or even opposite than you? How does Chachma get along with Bina? And how does Bina get along with Chachma to the point that they can work together under the same roof of your brain? How? They're so different. How do they work together? They should be engaged in fighting every single moment of your life. They should be waging campaigns and taking ads on Facebook against each other. They should be waging campaigns against each other day and night. Chachma, Team Chachma, Bina's Team Bina, color war, should be completely at each other's throats. And yet, thank God it's not the case, that our minds do work in a functional way, where we can both immerse and step out. And it's a seamless experience. We immerse for a little bit, we step out and dry off, and then look at the pool, we're in and we're out, we move in and out, and there's Chachma, and there's Bina and Chachma, and it all works together seamlessly. How does it happen? Next week we explore the secret of collaboration. How do they collaborate? What brings them together? Understanding this can give us hope to collaborating with each other, with our fellow human beings that are separate, nay, opposite. I love that little phrase. Nay, opposite from each other. We're different than each other, sometimes opposite from each other. There's still hope. There's still hope. I am not giving up hope. I am not. I'm not throwing in the towel yet on humanity. I'm not throwing in the towel on us getting along and figuring out a way, because it's doable and we do it inside of ourselves every moment of the day. Our minds are working together in harmony. Despite the distinctions, we can make it happen. Next week, we look at, you can write this down, the Kabbalah of the wall. The secret to unity is the Kabbalah of the wall. Next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you very much for joining me for Kabbalah Coffee. Can't wait to see you next week, next Sunday. Until then, keep on your calendars this notice. This Tuesday night, we're starting a brand new course called, Riva, what is it? Joking. It's called the Jewish Course of Why. Your top questions about Judaism, about Jewish belief, about Jewish characters, about Jews, Jewish culture, right? All the biggest questions about Judaism answered. Bring your own questions. I'll have 50 questions to explore over our 6 weeks together. Bring your own questions and we'll do our best. I'll do my best to answer them. We're going to have time after every class, or part of every class, for open Q&A. Join me for a fun and fabulous course. It starts 8 p.m. this Tuesday night, the Jewish Course of Why. And you might be asking why, and I'll answer why not. So join me Tuesday night. Next Monday, not this Monday, not tomorrow night, but a week from tomorrow night, the Jewish Matrix Revealed, Hebrew numerology course, which is going to be just exquisitely fun and amazing. We're going to take a deep dive into the world of Hebrew numerology and decode the code of creation. So join me then. Check your local listings for times for all of that. And I think that's it. I think that's it for right now. Riva, anything else? Did we miss something? No? Okay. Say bye to everybody.
Thank you very much. Great class.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you as always
Beautiful
for being
class.
here.
Thank you. Shabbat
Pleasure.
shalom.
Have a Shavua Tov. Everyone, please stay well and stay healthy. And can't wait to see you soon and study together soon. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.
Hat dieses Markes